The plate of scrambled eggs and bacon appeared in front of Victoria Anderson before she even realized the cowboy had entered the boarding house kitchen. And for the first time in her 22 years, she felt something crack inside the careful shell her father had spent a lifetime building around her heart. Owen Mitchell set down the coffee pot beside her plate with hands that were surprisingly gentle for a man who spent his days breaking horses and mending fence lines across the vast stretches of Idaho Territory. Victoria stared at the steam rising from the cup, her throat tight with an emotion she could not name. In her father's house back in Boston, she had served every meal, poured every drink, darned every sock, and scrubbed every floor since her mother died when she was 8 years old. Her father, Samuel Anderson, had looked at her across the funeral reception and said words that had shaped every day since. "You were born to serve men, Victoria. It is your purpose, your duty, and the only value you will ever have in this world." She had believed him. For 14 years, she had believed him with every fiber of her being until 3 weeks ago when he had sold her like a piece of furniture to a cattle baron in Shoshone City, Idaho. The man was 57 years old, with 3 grown sons and a reputation for working his ranch hands half to death. Her father had accepted $500 and a promise that Victoria would be married within a week of arrival. She had packed her single carpetbag with shaking hands, boarded the train west, and tried not to think about what awaited her. But the cattle baron, Chester Warwick, had died 2 days before her train pulled into the station. A heart attack had taken him while he was shouting at one of his sons about a broken wagon wheel. Victoria had stepped off the train into the dusty street of Shoshone City with her carpetbag and a letter of introduction to a dead man, and nowhere else in the world to go. Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, who ran the boarding house on the east end of town, had taken one look at Victoria's pale face and trembling hands and made a decision that saved her life. "You can work here," she had said, her voice brisk but not unkind. "Room and board in exchange for help with the cooking and cleaning. I have got 8 boarders, mostly miners and ranch hands, and my arthritis makes the stairs a misery." Victoria had accepted because she had no other choice and had spent the first 3 days moving through the boarding house like a ghost, scrubbing floors and washing linens and serving meals to men who barely looked at her. She kept her eyes down, her voice soft, and her hands busy, exactly as her father had taught her. Then Owen Mitchell had arrived. He was a horsebreaker by trade, 25 years old, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of the summer sky over the Sawtooth Mountains. He had taken a room on the second floor and paid for 2 weeks in advance with coins that smelled like leather and saddle soap. That first morning, Victoria had risen at 4 to start the breakfast fires, her hands moving through the familiar motions of mixing biscuit dough and frying bacon. She had not heard him come down the stairs. "You should not be doing this alone," he had said, and she had jumped so hard she nearly dropped the spatula. He was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, his hair damp from washing, his shirt buttoned but not yet tucked into his trousers. "Where is Mrs. Hayes?" "Her hip troubles her in the mornings," Victoria had said, keeping her eyes on the skillet. "I can manage." "I am sure you can." His voice had been thoughtful. "But you should not have to." Before she could respond, he had rolled up his sleeves and started cracking eggs into a bowl. Victoria had stood frozen, watching him whisk them with the easy competence of someone who had cooked over many campfires. He had taken over the skillet without asking permission, had fried the eggs and bacon, had toasted bread over the fire, and then had done something that stopped her heart in her chest. He had served her breakfast. Now, 3 weeks later, it had become their routine. Every morning, Victoria woke in the dark and came downstairs to find Owen already in the kitchen, building up the fire and setting water to boil. They worked side by side in comfortable silence, but when the food was ready, he always filled her plate first. He always poured her coffee first. He always pulled out her chair and made her sit down before he served any of the other boarders. "You need to eat," he said now, settling into the chair across from her with his own plate. "You are getting too thin." Victoria looked up at him, really looked at him, and felt that crack in her heart widen a little more. No man had ever cared whether she ate. No man had ever noticed if she was thin or tired or sad. Her father had taught her that her needs did not matter, that her comfort was irrelevant, that her entire existence should revolve around making men's lives easier. Owen Mitchell was teaching her something different, and it terrified her. "I eat enough," she said quietly, but she picked up her fork because the concern in his eyes made her chest ache. "You work too hard." He bit into a piece of bacon, his gaze never leaving her face. "Mrs. Hayes should hire another girl to help. She cannot afford it." Victoria took a sip of coffee, and the warmth of it spread through her like courage. "The boarding house barely makes enough to keep the roof repaired." "Then the boarders should do more to help." Owen's jaw tightened. "You should not be doing all the cooking and cleaning and laundry for 8 men." "It is what I am here for." The words came automatically, the echo of her father's voice in her head. "It is my purpose." Something flashed in Owen's eyes, something that looked almost like anger, but his voice stayed gentle. "Your purpose is whatever you decide it is, Victoria, not what someone else tells you." She did not know how to respond to that, so she focused on her eggs and tried to ignore the way her heart was pounding. The other boarders started coming down for breakfast, their boots heavy on the stairs, their voices loud and rough. Owen stood and started serving them, moving between the table and the stove with an efficiency that spoke of long practice. Victoria ate her breakfast in small bites, each one feeling like an act of rebellion. After breakfast, after the boarders had left for their various jobs, and Mrs. Hayes had shuffled downstairs to sit in her rocking chair by the front window, Owen found Victoria in the laundry room behind the kitchen. She was scrubbing shirts in a huge tin tub, her arms deep in soapy water, her hair escaping from its bun in damp tendrils. "Leave that," he said from the doorway. Victoria's hands stilled. "I have to finish the washing." "It can wait." He stepped into the small room, and suddenly the space felt impossibly tiny. "Come with me." "Where?" She looked up at him, her heart doing something strange in her chest. "There is something I want to show you." He held out his hand, and Victoria stared at it like it was a snake. Men did not offer her their hands. Men told her what to do and expected her to do it. They did not ask. They did not offer. They did not look at her the way Owen was looking at her now, like she was a person whose answer actually mattered. Slowly, carefully, she dried her hands on her apron and placed one wet palm in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and calloused and steady, and he led her out of the laundry room, through the kitchen, and out the back door into the bright September morning. Shoshone City spread out below them in a rambling collection of wooden buildings and dusty streets. Beyond the town, the Idaho landscape rolled away in shades of gold and green, the mountains rising in the distance like the backbone of the world. Owen led her down the steps and around the side of the boarding house to where a horse was tied to the fence rail. The animal was the color of dark honey, with a black mane and tail and eyes that held surprising intelligence. Victoria had never been particularly interested in horses. They were transportation, work animals, tools. But this horse turned its head to look at her, and something in its gaze made her breath catch. "Her name is Dulcie," Owen said. "I have been working with her for 3 months. She was wild-caught, and she had some bad experiences with humans before I got her. She did not trust anyone." Victoria stepped closer, drawn by something she could not name. Dulcie's ears swiveled forward, attentive but not afraid. "She is beautiful. She is strong." Owen moved to stand beside the horse, his hand resting on her neck. "And smart, and capable of far more than anyone gave her credit for. People wanted to use her for farm work, plowing fields and hauling wagons, but that is not what she was born for." Victoria looked at him and found him watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. What was she born for? Freedom! The word hung in the air between them like a promise. Speed, wide open spaces, and her own choices. Once I realized that, everything changed. I stopped trying to make her into what other people wanted and started helping her become what she actually is. Victoria's throat closed up. She knew he was not just talking about the horse. She knew it the same way she knew her own name, the same way she knew that the sun would rise tomorrow, the same way she knew that everything her father had ever told her was a lie. "I do not know how to be anything else," she whispered. The confession pulled from somewhere deep inside her. "I do not know how to be free." Owen stepped closer, his hand leaving the horse to reach for hers again. "Then let me teach you." For 3 weeks, Victoria had been feeling something crack inside her. Now, standing in the sunlight, with Owen's hand wrapped around hers, and a wild horse watching them with knowing eyes, that crack split wide open, and everything her father had built came tumbling down. "Yes," she said, and the word felt like the first true thing she had ever spoken. Owen's face transformed. His smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "Can you ride?" "No." The admission should have embarrassed her, but somehow it did not. "My father said it was not proper for a lady." "Your father said a lot of things that were not true." Owen's voice was fierce. "Riding is one of the most proper things a person can do. It is just you and the horse and the whole world spread out ahead of you. Come here." He helped her approach Dulcie, showed her how to hold out her hand for the horse to sniff, how to stroke the velvety nose and scratch behind the alert ears. Dulcie allowed the attention with patient grace, and Victoria felt something unknot in her chest. This creature had been caught and confined and forced into a shape she was never meant to hold, and yet here she stood, still magnificent, still herself. "I cannot teach you to ride in a dress," Owen said, his tone apologetic. "But I can teach you other things. How to approach a horse, how to read their mood, how to understand what they need." They spent the next hour together in the little paddock behind the boarding house, with Owen explaining the subtleties of horse behavior and Victoria listening like her life depended on it. He showed her how Dulcie's ears told her mood, how the shift of weight from one hoof to another signaled intention, how a horse could communicate 1,000 things without making a sound. "People are not so different," Owen said, leaning against the fence as Dulcie grazed nearby. "We say what we mean with more than just words. Your father told you that you were born to serve men, but every time you flinch when someone moves too fast, every time you make yourself smaller to fit into a room, every time you forget to eat because you are too busy taking care of everyone else, you are saying something different. You are saying that you were taught your needs do not matter. But that is not the same as them actually not mattering." Victoria's eyes burned. She had cried more in the past 3 weeks than she had in the previous 14 years, and she was tired of it. Tired of feeling weak, tired of feeling broken, tired of feeling like something that needed to be fixed. But Owen did not look at her like she was broken. He looked at her like she was a wild horse who had forgotten how to run. "Why do you care?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "You do not know me. You do not owe me anything. Why do you wake up early every morning to make me breakfast? Why do you spend your time teaching me about horses? Why do you look at me like I am someone worth looking at?" Owen was quiet for a long moment, his eyes on the distant mountains. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and rough. "My mother died when I was 15. My father remarried within 6 months to a woman who had 3 daughters of her own. The youngest, Mary, was 14. She was quiet and careful, and she spent all her time trying to make everyone else happy, even when it was killing her." He paused, and Victoria saw his throat work as he swallowed. By the time she was 16, she barely spoke. She barely ate. She moved through the house like a shadow, and no one seemed to notice. I tried to help her, tried to talk to her, but I was just a kid myself, and I did not know what to say. When I was 18, I left home to work on a ranch in Montana. I was gone for 2 years. Victoria's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of what was coming. When I came back, Mary was dead. Owen's voice cracked on the word. She had just stopped eating, stopped sleeping, stopped wanting to live. My stepmother said it was a fever, but I knew better. I knew that Mary had spent so long making herself small and quiet and convenient that she had just disappeared. Tears slid down Victoria's cheeks, hot and unstoppable. Owen turned to look at her, and his eyes were bright with old grief. So when I see you working yourself to exhaustion, when I see you flinch away from kindness like it might hurt you, when I see you forgetting to eat because you are too busy serving everyone else, I see Mary, and I think about all the things I should have done differently, all the ways I could have helped her understand that she mattered. He reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. I cannot save Mary, but maybe I can help you save yourself. Victoria could not speak, could not breathe, could not do anything except stand there with tears streaming down her face and Owen's hand cradling her cheek like she was something precious. I do not want to be saved, she finally managed to say. I want to learn how to save myself. Owen's smile was sad and proud at the same time. Then that is what I will teach you. They went back inside eventually, because the laundry still needed finishing and the midday meal still needed preparing. But something had changed between them. Some barrier had fallen away, and Victoria found herself talking to Owen in a way she had never talked to anyone. She told him about her childhood in Boston, about her mother's death, about the long years of trying to be good enough, quiet enough, useful enough to earn her father's love. She told him about the cattle baron and the train ride west and the strange, terrifying relief she had felt when she learned that Chester Warwick was dead. Owen listened to all of it without interrupting, his hands busy with helping her wring out the heavy wet sheets and hang them on the line behind the house. When she finally ran out of words, he was quiet for a moment before speaking. Your father was wrong, he said simply. You were not born to serve men. You were born to be exactly who you are, whatever that turns out to be. I do not know who that is, Victoria admitted, pinning a pillowcase to the line. Then we will find out together. The days that followed fell into a new pattern. Victoria still woke before dawn, still helped Mrs. Hayes run the boarding house, still cooked and cleaned and did laundry. But Owen was always there, working beside her, making her sit down and eat, pulling her away from work when he thought she needed rest. He taught her about horses and cattle and the vast wild spaces of Idaho. He told her stories about his years working ranches across the West, about sleeping under the stars and waking up to see mountains painted pink by the sunrise. More importantly, he taught her that her opinions mattered. He asked her what she thought about things, what she wanted, what she liked and disliked. At first, Victoria had no idea how to answer. She had spent so long trying not to have opinions that she had lost track of them entirely. But Owen was patient and persistent, and slowly she began to remember that she had once been a little girl who loved strawberries and hated the color yellow, who dreamed of seeing the ocean and learning to read books in French. What happened to that little girl? Owen asked one evening as they sat on the back steps of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. My father told me she was selfish, Victoria said quietly. He said that wanting things for myself was a sin, that good women exist to make men's lives better, not to chase their own foolish dreams. Your father was a bastard. Owen's voice was flat and hard, and wrong about everything that matters. Victoria looked at him, this cowboy who had somehow become the center of her world in just a few short weeks, and felt her heart crack open even wider. Why are you so kind to me? Owen turned to meet her gaze, and the look in his eyes made her breath catch. Because you deserve kindness. Because I think you are remarkable. Because every time you smile, which is not nearly often enough, I feel like I am watching the sun come up. Her breath stopped. Owen, I know it is too soon, he said quickly. I know you just escaped from one man trying to control your life, and the last thing you need is another man pushing his way into it. But I need you to know that this is not charity. Victoria, this is not me trying to save some poor broken thing. This is me falling in love with the strongest, bravest woman I have ever met. Victoria's world tilted sideways. Love. He had said love. She opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. Her father had told her that love was a transaction, that a woman traded obedience for security, service for tolerance. He had never mentioned anything about sunsets and shared laughter and someone looking at you like you were the answer to a question they had been asking their whole life. You do not have to say anything, Owen continued, his voice gentle. I just needed you to know. Whatever happens, whatever you decide, I want you to know that you are loved, not for what you can do for me, but for who you are. Something inside Victoria's chest exploded like a firework. She had spent her whole life believing she had no value beyond her usefulness, and here was this man telling her the exact opposite, telling her she mattered, telling her she was loved. I do not know how to do this, she whispered. I do not know how to be loved. Neither do I, really. Owen's smile was crooked and uncertain. But I figure we can learn together, if you are willing. Victoria thought about Dulcie the horse, wild caught and terrified, and slowly learning to trust again. She thought about Mary, the girl who had made herself so small she had disappeared. She thought about the woman she had been 4 weeks ago, stepping off the train with dead eyes and a carpet bag, expecting nothing from life but more of the same endless servitude. And then she thought about the woman she was becoming, the woman who was learning that she could have opinions and wants and dreams, the woman who was remembered that she had once loved strawberries, the woman who was falling in love with a cowboy who made her breakfast every morning. I am willing, she said, and then, because words were not enough for the enormity of what she was feeling, she leaned forward and kissed him. Owen froze for half a second, and then his arms came around her, and he was kissing her back with a tenderness that made her want to cry. It was nothing like the rough, demanding kisses she had imagined, based on the crude jokes of the men who passed through the boarding house. It was soft and questioning and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, Victoria was shaking. I love you, she said, testing out the words. I do not know if I am doing it right, but I love you. Owen's laugh was breathless and joyful. You are doing it perfectly. They sat on the steps until the stars came out, talking about everything and nothing, making plans and sharing dreams. Owen told her about a piece of land he had been saving to buy, 50 acres with a creek running through it and mountains rising behind. He wanted to breed horses, he said, working with wild mustangs and teaching them to trust humans again. Victoria told him about wanting to learn to read more books, to maybe even learn to write stories of her own. She had always loved the sound of words, the way they could paint pictures in your mind. We could do both, Owen said thoughtfully. Build a ranch, raise horses, and every evening we could sit by the fire and you could read to me from whatever book you are working on. Every evening? Victoria's voice was shy. That sounds like a long time. I am hoping for forever, Owen said, his hand finding hers in the darkness. But we can start with every evening and see where it goes. Forever. The word echoed in Victoria's mind as she lay in her narrow bed that night, staring at the ceiling and feeling like her whole world had been turned upside down. A month ago, forever had meant endless years of servitude and exhaustion, and slowly disappearing like Mary. Now it meant something entirely different. It meant choice and love and a cowboy who made her breakfast every morning. The next few weeks passed in a blur of work and stolen moments. Owen finished his contract breaking horses for a local rancher and started picking up odd jobs around town to extend his stay at the boarding house. Victoria continued helping Mrs. Hayes, but now she did it with purpose rather than resignation. She was saving money, she realized. Every penny that Mrs. Hayes paid her for her work was a penny toward her own future, her own choices, her own life. In the evenings, after the dinner dishes were washed and the boarders had retreated to their rooms or the saloon, Victoria and Owen would slip away to walk through the quiet streets of Shoshone City. Sometimes they talked, sharing more of their pasts and dreams for the future. Sometimes they just walked in comfortable silence, hands linked, shoulders occasionally brushing. And sometimes Owen would pull her into the shadows behind the livery stable or the feed store and kiss her like she was the air he needed to breathe. Victoria learned that love was not a transaction, but a transformation. Every time Owen smiled at her, every time he asked her opinion, every time he made her breakfast and insisted she eat first, she felt herself becoming more solid, more real, more wholly herself. The habits of subservience were hard to break, but Owen was patient. When she automatically started to serve him before herself, he would gently take the spoon from her hand and fill her plate first. When she began to apologize for having an opinion, he would stop her and ask her to say it again, louder, with confidence. "You are allowed to take up space," he told her one October afternoon as they walked along the creek that wound through the eastern edge of town. The cottonwood trees were turning gold, their leaves catching the light like coins. "You are allowed to be loud and certain and wrong sometimes. You are allowed to be a whole entire person, not just a shadow serving other people." "It feels selfish," Victoria admitted, watching the water flow over smooth stones. "That is because you were taught that any thought for yourself is selfish," Owen said. "But taking care of yourself is not selfish. It is necessary. You cannot pour from an empty cup, Victoria. You cannot give to others if there is nothing left of you." She thought about that as they walked back to town in the gathering dusk. Thought about Mary, who had given and given until there was nothing left. Thought about her own mother, who had worked herself to exhaustion trying to meet her father's impossible standards and had died when Victoria was only 8. Thought about all the women who had been told that their value lay in their service, their worth measured by their usefulness. "I do not want to disappear," she said quietly as they reached the boarding house. Owen stopped and turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "You will not. I will not let you, and more importantly, you will not let yourself." "How can you be so sure?" "Because you are here," he said simply. "You survived your father. You survived being sold like property to a stranger. You survived losing everything you knew and starting over in a place where you had nothing and no one. You are stronger than you think, Victoria. You just need to start believing it." A week later, Owen asked her to marry him. They were in the paddock behind the boarding house, and Victoria was finally learning to ride. Owen had borrowed a gentle mare from the livery stable and had spent the past hour teaching Victoria how to mount, how to sit, how to hold the reins. She was awkward and nervous, but also exhilarated in a way she had never experienced. Up on the horse's back, she could see the whole world spread out around her. She felt tall and powerful and free. "You are a natural," Owen said, grinning up at her from where he stood at the mare's head. "Another few lessons, and you will be ready to ride out into the open country." "Really?" Victoria could not keep the excitement out of her voice. "You think so?" "I know so." He reached up to help her dismount, his hands steady on her waist as she slid down. She ended up standing very close to him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his blue eyes, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cool October air. "Victoria," he said, and something in his tone made her breath catch. "I know we have not known each other very long, just about 6 weeks, but I have never been more certain of anything in my life. I love you. I want to build a life with you. I want to buy that land I told you about and breed horses and sit by the fire every evening listening to you read. I want to wake up next to you every morning and make you breakfast for the rest of our lives." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a ring. It was simple, just a thin gold band with a small blue stone set into it. "This was my mother's," he said. "It is not fancy, but it is real, like what I feel for you. Victoria Anderson, will you marry me?" Victoria stared at the ring, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. 6 weeks ago, she had been on a train heading west to marry a man she had never met, a man her father had sold her to like livestock. She had been empty and hopeless and certain that her life would never be anything more than endless servitude. Now she was standing in an Idaho paddock with a cowboy who made her breakfast every morning, who taught her about horses and freedom and believing in herself, who looked at her like she was the most important person in the world. She thought about her father's voice telling her she was born to serve men, and then she thought about Owen's voice telling her she was born to be free. Yes, she said, her voice strong and clear. Yes, I will marry you. Owen's face lit up like the sunrise, and he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, the blue stone catching the light. Then he pulled her into his arms and kissed her, and Victoria felt every last piece of her father's poison dissolve away. She was not born to serve men. She was born to be loved by this man and to love him in return, and that was an entirely different thing. They were married 2 weeks later in the small church at the center of Shoshone City. Mrs. Hayes stood up as Victoria's witness, tears streaming down her weathered face. A ranch hand named Tom Malloy, who had worked with Owen over the past few years, stood up for him. The ceremony was simple and quick, the preacher's words washing over Victoria like a benediction. When Owen slipped a second ring onto her finger, a wedding band that matched the engagement ring, she felt something slot into place inside her chest. I promise to love you, Owen said, his voice low enough that only she could hear. I promise to respect you. I promise to spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know how valuable you are, how remarkable, how completely and utterly loved. Victoria's throat was too tight for words, so she just nodded and hoped he could see everything she felt written on her face. They spent their wedding night in a hotel room in Shoshone City because Mrs. Hayes had insisted she did not need Victoria's help for one single night. Victoria was nervous, terrified of disappointing Owen, terrified of not knowing what to do. But Owen was patient and gentle and told her over and over that they had all the time in the world to figure this out together. There is no right way to do this, he murmured against her hair as they lay tangled together in the narrow hotel bed, the lamp turned low. There is just you and me, learning each other, choosing each other, every single day. Afterward, as Victoria lay with her head on Owen's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she thought about all the things her father had never told her. He had never told her that love could be gentle. He had never told her that marriage could be a partnership. He had never told her that she deserved to be happy, that her pleasure mattered, that she was allowed to want things for herself. I am glad you are here, she whispered into the darkness. Owen's arms tightened around her. I am glad you are here too. The next morning, Owen made her breakfast. They were back at the boarding house by dawn, and Owen insisted on taking over the kitchen while Victoria sat at the table and drank coffee and felt like a different person than she had been 2 months ago. Mrs. Hayes came downstairs and took one look at Victoria's face and started crying again. You look happy, the older woman said, wiping her eyes. Truly happy. I am, Victoria said, and realized it was true. She was happy, not perfectly, not without fear or uncertainty about the future, but genuinely, deeply happy in a way she had never imagined possible. Over the following months, Victoria and Owen saved every penny they could. Owen worked at the livery stable and took on horse-breaking contracts for ranchers throughout the valley. Victoria continued helping Mrs. Hayes and also took in mending and sewing work from people around town. It was hard work, long hours, but it felt different now. She was not working to make herself small and useful. She was working towards something, building something, creating the life she wanted rather than enduring the life she had been given. In the evenings, they looked at land. Owen took her out on horseback to see different properties, teaching her to evaluate them with a horseman's eye. Was there water, good grazing, shelter from winter storms? Victoria learned to assess these things, to have opinions about them, to argue with Owen when she disagreed with his choices. The first time she told him she thought he was wrong about a piece of property, he had laughed with delight and kissed her soundly. There she is, he had said. There is the woman who knows her own mind. They finally found the perfect place in late March of 1883. 52 acres, nestled in a valley north of Shoshone City, with a creek running through it and mountains rising behind. There was a small cabin on the property, barely more than a shack, but it was sturdy and could be expanded. The land had good grass and several groves of cottonwood trees. Most importantly, it felt right. Victoria stood in the middle of the property with the wind in her hair and the mountains at her back and knew this was home. Owen bought it with the money they had saved, and they moved in on a bright April day with everything they owned packed into a borrowed wagon. Mrs. Hayes cried again, but she was happy for them. She had hired another girl to help with the boarding house, a quiet teenager named Sarah, who reminded Victoria painfully of Mary. Before they left, Victoria pulled Sarah aside and told her something she hoped the girl would remember. "You matter," Victoria said fiercely. "Your needs matter. Your wants matter. Your dreams matter. Do not let anyone tell you different." Sarah had looked at her with wide, startled eyes and nodded slowly. Victoria hoped it would be enough, hoped that maybe she had planted a seed that would grow into something strong. The first year on the ranch was hard work, but it was the best year of Victoria's life. They expanded the cabin, adding 2 more rooms and a proper kitchen. Owen built a barn and several corrals and started bringing in wild mustangs to gentle and train. Victoria planted a garden, started a small flock of chickens, and discovered she had a talent for training horses that rivaled Owen's. The mustangs responded to her quiet patience, her understanding of what it meant to be trapped and frightened, and slowly learning to trust. Every morning, Owen still made her breakfast. It had become their ritual, the thing that anchored their days. He would wake before dawn, build up the fire, and cook while Victoria dressed and tidied the cabin. Then they would sit at their small table and eat together, planning the day ahead, talking about the horses or the garden or their plans for the future. "I am thinking about writing to my father," Victoria said one morning in July, watching the steam rise from her coffee cup. Owen's hand stilled on his fork. "Are you sure?" "No." She smiled slightly. "But I think I need to. I need to tell him that I am happy, that I am married to a good man, that everything he told me was wrong. I do not know if it will change anything, but I need to say it." "Then say it." Owen reached across the table to take her hand. "And if he writes back with more poison, we will burn the letter and never think of him again." Victoria wrote the letter that afternoon, sitting at the table with paper and pencil, choosing each word carefully. She told her father about Owen, about the ranch, about learning to train horses and plant gardens and be a full person rather than a shadow. She told him she had learned he was wrong about everything that mattered. She told him she forgave him, not because he deserved it, but because she did not want to carry his bitterness anymore. She never received a reply, and after a few months, she stopped checking for one. It did not matter anymore. Her father's voice in her head had grown quieter and quieter, replaced by Owen's steady affirmations and her own growing confidence. By their first anniversary, the ranch was thriving. They had trained and sold a dozen horses, earning enough money to buy more land and start building a larger barn. Victoria's garden produced enough vegetables to sell at the market in Shoshone City, and her chickens laid more eggs than they could eat. They were not rich, but they were comfortable, and more importantly, they were happy. On their anniversary night, Owen made Victoria's favorite meal, a beef stew with fresh vegetables from the garden, and they ate by candlelight at their table. Afterward, he pulled her outside to look at the stars. "I want to tell you something," he said, his arm around her waist as they stood in the cool evening air. "Every morning when I wake up and make you breakfast, I think about the day I first saw you. You looked so lost, Victoria, so empty. And I thought about Mary, about how I failed her, and I promised myself I would not fail you." "You did not fail Mary," Victoria said quietly. "You were just a kid yourself." "Maybe." Owen's voice was thoughtful. "But I learned something from losing her. I learned that the small things matter. Breakfast every morning, asking someone how they are feeling, noticing when they are tired or sad or scared, treating them like they matter, because they do. You taught me something too. What? That broken things can heal. He turned to face her, his hands coming up to frame her face. That people who have been hurt and beaten down can stand up again. That love is not about saving someone. It is about being there while they save themselves. Victoria's eyes burned. I could not have done it without you. Yes, you could have. Owen's voice was fierce. But I am glad you did not have to. I am glad I get to be here, watching you become who you were always meant to be. They stood together under the Idaho stars, and Victoria thought about the woman she had been and the woman she was becoming. She was 23 years old, and for the first time in her life, she was exactly where she wanted to be. The years that followed were full of the ordinary magic of a life well lived. The ranch continued to grow, and their reputation for training quality horses spread throughout the territory. Victoria discovered she had a particular talent for working with horses that had been abused or neglected, the ones other trainers had given up on. She understood them in a way that came from experience, knew how to be patient, how to offer trust without demanding it, how to let them heal at their own pace. Owen watched her work with a pride that never faded. You are remarkable, he told her regularly, and she was learning to believe him. They talked about having children, but decided to wait a few years until the ranch was more established. Victoria wanted to be sure she was strong enough, healthy enough, ready enough. She did not want to be like her mother, giving so much to her family that there was nothing left for herself. Owen understood and never pushed. They had time, he said. They had all the time in the world. In the spring of 1885, Victoria ran into Sarah, the girl who had replaced her at Mrs. Hayes's boarding house. Sarah was walking through the market in Shoshone City with her head down and her shoulders hunched, and Victoria's heart clenched. She looked exactly like Victoria had looked 2 years ago, like she was trying to take up as little space as possible. Sarah, Victoria called, and the girl looked up with startled eyes. How are you? Fine, madam, Sarah said automatically, but her eyes told a different story. Victoria made a decision. Would you like to come to the ranch for a visit? Owen and I could use some extra help for a few weeks, if you can be spared from the boarding house. Sarah's face transformed. Really? Really? Victoria smiled. And I can teach you to ride if you want. Sarah came to the ranch the following week and stayed for a month. Victoria and Owen worked her hard, but they also fed her well, made her rest, and most importantly, treated her like a person whose thoughts and feelings mattered. Victoria taught her to ride, to work with horses, to speak up when she had an opinion. She saw Sarah slowly uncurl, like a plant reaching for sunlight. You are good at this, Owen observed one evening as they watched Sarah laughing with one of the horses in the corral, helping people remember they matter. I am just doing what you did for me, Victoria said. No. Owen's voice was thoughtful. You are doing more than that. You understand it in a way I never could because you lived it. You know what it feels like to disappear. When Sarah left to return to town, she was a different person. She stood straighter, spoke louder, took up more space. A year later, she married a kind young man who worked at the feed store, and they started their own small farm. Victoria and Owen went to the wedding, and Victoria cried when she saw how happy Sarah looked. One person at a time, Owen said, holding her as she cried. You are changing the world one person at a time. In the summer of 1886, Victoria realized she was pregnant. She told Owen one morning after breakfast, her hands shaking as she held the coffee cup. Are you happy? He asked carefully, searching her face. I am terrified, she admitted. But yes, I am happy. Owen pulled her into his arms, his face buried in her hair. You are going to be an amazing mother. What if I am like my father? The fear had been eating at her for days. What if I hurt our child the way he hurt me? You will not. Owen pulled back to look at her, his hands on her shoulders. You know what it feels like to be hurt that way, which means you will never do it to someone else. You will teach our child that they matter, that they are loved, that they are allowed to be whoever they are." Victoria wanted to believe him, spent the next several months trying to believe him as her body changed and grew. The pregnancy was difficult, with long stretches of exhaustion and nausea, but Owen was endlessly patient. He took over more of the ranch work, insisted she rest, and continued making her breakfast every single morning. "You are eating for two now," he would say, filling her plate. "You need your strength." Their son was born in March of 1887 during a late spring snowstorm that turned the world white and quiet. The labor was long and painful, with only Owen and a midwife from town to help. But when Victoria finally held her baby in her arms, she understood something she hadn't known before. This was what love was supposed to feel like: fierce and protective and utterly selfless, but not in a way that diminished her. She would give everything for this child, but it was a choice freely made, not an obligation forced upon her. They named him Oliver after Owen's father, who had died several years before. Oliver Henry Mitchell, a name that felt solid and real. Victoria looked down at her son's tiny face and made a promise. She would raise him to be kind and strong and respectful. She would teach him that women were people, not servants. She would make sure he knew that love was not about control or obligation, but about choice and respect and partnership. "He has your eyes," Owen said, leaning over her shoulder to look at their son. "He has your stubbornness," Victoria replied, feeling Oliver's surprisingly strong grip on her finger. Parenthood was harder than Victoria had imagined. The sleepless nights, the constant worry, the overwhelming responsibility of keeping another human alive. But it was also better. Every morning, Owen would bring her breakfast in bed while she nursed Oliver. Every evening, they would sit together and watch the sunset with their son between them. Every day, Victoria felt herself growing stronger, more confident, more certain that she was doing this right. Oliver was 6 months old when Victoria's father died. She received a letter from a lawyer in Boston informing her that Samuel Anderson had passed away from pneumonia and that he had left his entire estate to the church. Victoria had not been mentioned in his will. She had been erased from his life as completely as if she had never existed. She read the letter twice, standing in the kitchen with Oliver babbling in his cradle nearby, and waited to feel something: grief, anger, relief. But all she felt was a distant sort of pity. Her father had died alone and bitter, surrounded by his righteousness and his rules, and he had never known the joy of loving someone more than he loved his own pride. "Are you all right?" Owen asked, coming in from the barn to find her still standing with the letter in her hand. "I think so." Victoria folded the letter carefully and set it aside. "I think I have been grieving him for years already. The man I thought he was, the father I wanted him to be. This is just making it official." Owen pulled her into his arms, and they stood together in the kitchen while Oliver sang nonsense syllables to himself, and the late afternoon sun slanted through the windows. Victoria thought about the girl she had been, desperate for her father's approval, willing to erase herself to earn his love. That girl was gone, replaced by a woman who knew her own worth. The years continued to pass, marked by the ordinary milestones of family life. Oliver learned to walk, to talk, to ride a horse before he was 4 years old. He grew up surrounded by love and horses and wide open spaces, and he never once doubted that he was wanted. Victoria and Owen were careful to raise him with an understanding of respect and equality, teaching him to help with all the household chores, to treat everyone with kindness regardless of their gender or station. When Oliver was 5, they had a daughter. Rose Margaret Mitchell was born in the early morning hours of a beautiful June day, and she came into the world screaming her displeasure at being disturbed. Victoria laughed through her exhaustion, recognizing the fierce spirit in her daughter's angry cries. "She is going to be a handful," Owen said, his voice full of delight as he held his daughter for the first time. "Good," Victoria said. The world needs more women who are not afraid to make noise. Rose lived up to her first impression. She was loud and opinionated and absolutely fearless, climbing everything she could reach and arguing with anyone who tried to tell her what to do. Victoria watched her daughter's bold confidence with a mixture of pride and wonder. This was what she might have been if her father had not spent years teaching her to be quiet and small and convenient. When Rose was 3 and Oliver 8, they hired Sarah's younger sister, Emma, to help with the ranch work. Emma was 17 and looking for work after her parents died in a wagon accident. She reminded Victoria so much of herself at that age that it hurt to look at her sometimes. Emma was quiet and careful and desperate to please, and Victoria made it her mission to help the girl find her voice. It was easier now after years of practice. Victoria knew how to spot the signs of someone who had been taught they did not matter, knew how to gently push back against self-deprecation, how to insist on self-care, how to model the kind of confidence she wanted Emma to develop. Owen helped too, treating Emma with the same casual respect he showed everyone, making it clear through his actions that women were not less than, not servants, not objects to be used. Emma blossomed under their care, and within a year she was managing much of the day-to-day operations of the ranch. She had a gift for organization and planning, and she turned their somewhat chaotic household into a well-oiled machine. Victoria was grateful for the help, but more importantly, she was proud. Proud that she and Owen had created a place where young women could come and learn that they mattered. On their 10th anniversary, Owen woke Victoria before dawn and told her to get dressed. "I have something to show you," he said, his eyes bright with excitement. They left the children with Emma and rode out into the gray pre-dawn light. Owen led her up into the foothills, following a trail Victoria had never taken before. They rode for nearly an hour, climbing higher and higher until finally Owen stopped at the edge of a cliff overlooking their valley. The sun was just starting to rise, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. Below them, their ranch spread out like a patchwork quilt, the barn and corrals and house looking tiny from this height. The creek glittered like a silver ribbon, and the horses in the pasture were dark shapes moving through the pale grass. "I wanted you to see this," Owen said, dismounting and coming to help her down. "I wanted you to see what you built." Victoria looked out over the valley, her throat tight. 10 years ago, she had stepped off a train with nothing but a carpet bag and the expectation that her life would be an endless repetition of servitude and exhaustion. Now she had a home, a family, a purpose. She had Oliver and Rose, who were growing up knowing they were loved for exactly who they were. She had Emma and the other young women who had passed through their ranch over the years, learning that their voices mattered. She had Owen, who had loved her when she could not love herself, who had believed in her when she did not believe in herself, who made her breakfast every single morning. "We built it," she said, turning to face him. "Together." "No." Owen's smile was soft. "I helped, but this was you, Victoria. You survived things that would have broken most people. You healed. You learned to love yourself. You built a life based on choice and respect and joy instead of obligation and fear. You took everything your father taught you and proved it wrong. That was all you." Victoria kissed him, there on the cliff overlooking their valley, with the sunrise painting the world gold. "I could not have done it without you." "Maybe," Owen conceded, "but you could have. That is the difference between us and your father. He tried to make you small and dependent. I just reminded you how strong you already were." They stood together watching the sun rise, and Victoria thought about the phrase that had shaped her childhood. Her father had told her she was born to serve men, but the cowboy served her breakfast every morning, and in doing so, had taught her something far more valuable than obedience. He had taught her that love was not about service or obligation, or one person making themselves smaller to accommodate another. Love was about partnership, respect, and two people choosing each other every single day. The years continued to flow by like the creek on their property, steady and sure. Oliver grew into a thoughtful young man who treated everyone with kindness and respect. Rose grew into a force of nature, all passion and opinions and absolute certainty in her own worth. They hired more young women over the years, creating an informal network of support and healing. Victoria's reputation spread, and mothers from throughout the territory would bring their daughters to learn about horses and, more importantly, to learn that they mattered. Emma eventually married a rancher from a neighboring property, and Victoria stood up at her wedding with tears streaming down her face. Sarah came with her husband and 3 children, and the 2 women spent the reception reminiscing about how far they had come. Other young women Victoria had helped over the years came too, bringing their families, their confidence, their proof that healing was possible. "You have created something special here," Sarah said, watching Emma dance with her new husband. "You have saved so many people." "I have just reminded them of what they already knew," Victoria replied, "that they were worth saving." On their 20th anniversary, Owen was graying at the temples, and Victoria had laugh lines around her eyes. Their children were grown, Oliver working a ranch of his own with a kind young woman he had met in town, Rose studying to be a teacher with plans to open a school for girls. The ranch was well established, respected throughout Idaho as a place that produced exceptional horses and even more exceptional people. "We did good," Owen said, sitting on the porch with Victoria as they watched the sunset. It was a ritual they had maintained for 2 decades, this quiet time together at the end of each day. "We did," Victoria agreed, "though I think we have a few more years in us yet." Owen laughed. "A few more decades if I have my way. I am planning to make you breakfast every morning until we are both too old to chew." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him beside her. 20 years, and he still made her breakfast every morning. 20 years, and he still looked at her like she was the answer to a question he had been asking his whole life. 20 years, and she still felt her heart skip when he smiled at her. "Do you ever think about how different things could have been?" she asked quietly. "If Chester Warwick had not died, if Mrs. Hayes had not taken me in, if you had not come to the boarding house." "All the time," Owen admitted. "And then I thank God for every small chance and coincidence that brought you to me." "Thank you," Victoria said. "For what?" "For seeing me when I could not see myself. For loving me when I did not know how to be loved. For making me breakfast every morning and showing me that I was worth feeding." Owen turned to kiss her temple, his arm tightening around her shoulders. "Thank you for being brave enough to heal, for choosing to love me back, for building this life with me." They sat together until the stars came out, talking about their children and the ranch and all the small details of a life shared. And in the morning, as he had every morning for 20 years, Owen woke before dawn and made Victoria breakfast. He filled her plate first, poured her coffee first, pulled out her chair, and made sure she was settled before he served himself. It was a small thing, this daily ritual, but small things mattered. Small things were how you showed someone they were loved, how you proved that their needs were important, how you helped them remember that they were worth caring for. Victoria's father had been wrong about everything that mattered, but Owen had been right. She was not born to serve men. She was born to be exactly who she was, loved and respected and cherished for it. As the years continued to pass, Victoria and Owen became pillars of the community. Their ranch was known not just for quality horses, but as a place of healing and hope. Young women continued to come, sent by concerned mothers or escaping bad situations, and Victoria welcomed them all. She taught them about horses and gardens and self-respect. She showed them through her own example that it was possible to heal from even the deepest wounds. Oliver had 3 sons who visited often, bringing noise and chaos and joy. Rose never married, choosing instead to dedicate her life to education and becoming one of the most respected teachers in Idaho. She opened her school for girls, teaching them reading and mathematics, and perhaps most importantly, that they could be anything they wanted to be. On their 30th anniversary, Victoria and Owen took a trip back to Boston. It was Victoria's first time returning since she had left at 22, and she was surprised by how small everything looked. The house where she had grown up was still there, occupied by strangers now. She stood across the street and looked at it, remembering the frightened girl who had lived there, and felt nothing but compassion for her. "Are you all right?" Owen asked, his hand finding hers. "I am perfect," Victoria said, and meant it. "That girl is gone. She became someone better." They visited her mother's grave, and Victoria laid flowers and told her all about the life she had built. She told her about Owen and the ranch and the children and grandchildren. She told her about learning that she mattered, that she was worth loving, that she could be more than a servant. She hoped somewhere her mother heard and was proud. The trip back to Idaho felt like coming home in a way Boston never had. As their train pulled into Shoshone City and Victoria saw the mountains rising in the distance, she felt her heart expand with joy. This was home, this dusty western town where she had learned to be free, where she had met a cowboy who made her breakfast every morning, where she had built a life based on love and choice and the radical notion that she mattered. Emma met them at the station with the wagon, her own children now teenagers who helped run the ranch. "We missed you," she said, embracing Victoria tightly. "The place is not the same without you two." They drove back to the ranch through the familiar landscape, and Victoria felt peace settle over her like a blanket. She was 62 years old, and she had spent 40 years building a life that mattered. 40 years proving her father wrong. 40 years learning and relearning that she was worth loving. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Emma's family bustling around inside preparing dinner, Owen took Victoria's hand. "I have loved every single day of the past 30 years," he said. "Every single moment with you has been a gift." "Even the hard parts?" Victoria asked, thinking about the struggles they had faced over the decades. Droughts and hard winters, difficult foalings and horses they could not save, the ordinary tragedies of a life fully lived. "Especially the hard parts," Owen said, "because we faced them together. Because even in the worst moments, I got to wake up next to you and make you breakfast and remember that we had each other." Victoria leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to purple. She thought about the girl she had been, arriving in Shoshone City with a carpet bag and dead eyes, expecting nothing but more suffering. She thought about the woman she had become, strong and confident and surrounded by love. She thought about all the young women she had helped over the years, all the lives that had been changed because one cowboy had decided that making breakfast for a hurting woman was worth waking up early for. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for everything, for seeing me, for loving me, for helping me become who I was always meant to be." "You did that yourself," Owen replied. "I just made the breakfast." They laughed together, and the sound echoed across the valley they had built, the home they had created, the legacy they would leave behind, not just in their children and grandchildren, but in every woman who had learned at their ranch that she mattered, that she was worth loving, that she could be more than what the world told her she had to be. As the stars began to appear, Emma called them in for dinner. They went inside to the warmth and noise and love of family, and Victoria looked around the table at all the people who had been touched by the simple act of a cowboy making breakfast for a woman who had been taught she was not worth feeding. This was the legacy that mattered. Not the horses or the land or the money, but the lives they had changed, the hope they had given, the love they had shared. And in the morning, as he had every morning for 30 years, Owen would wake before dawn and make Victoria breakfast. He would fill her plate first, pour her coffee first, pull out her chair and make sure she was comfortable. It was a small thing, but small things mattered. Small things were how you changed the world, one person at a time, one breakfast at a time, one act of love at a time. Victoria had been told she was born to serve men, but the cowboy had served her breakfast every morning and taught her a different truth. She was born to be loved, to be respected, to be valued for exactly who she was, and that had made all the difference.